The morning sun in 1873, Colorado didn't just bring light. For Marcus Thornfield, it brought death. He stood in the doorway of his ramshackle cabin, the wood groaning under his weight, and stared out at the disaster. 3 more cattle. Dead. Their bodies were already swelling under the pale dawn. Black specks of buzzards circling high above. Patient. They always were. Each dead animal was a hammer blow, another nail pounded deep into the coffin of his dream. He was 38, but felt 100. His hands were maps of failure, stained with dirt and work that led to nothing. His face, a roadmap of worry carved by a sun that gave no life, only took it. This morning, the weight on his shoulders felt different. Heavier. It felt like the kind of weight that doesn't just bend a man, but breaks him. The drought had been a thief for 8 straight months. It stole the rain, turned his grass to yellow dust, and shrunk his creek into a pathetic line of muddy puddles. The real story, though, was on his kitchen table. A scatter of banknotes, stark and brutal. $247 in debt. A payment was due in 12 days. A payment he couldn't make. His credit was shot. His neighbors, who once clapped him on the back, now couldn't seem to meet his gaze. His cattle were dying faster than he could dig the graves. This wasn't a ranch anymore. It was a boneyard. Marcus pulled his worn hat down, the felt thin as paper, and walked toward the nearest carcass. The buzzards hopped away, annoyed, their black eyes judging him. He knelt, the dry earth cracking under his knees, trying to see if it was sickness, something he could fight. But he knew the truth. It was thirst. It was starvation. It was his own failure. That's when he saw it. A flicker of movement on the eastern ridge. A silhouette against the brightening sky. Someone was walking toward his ranch. Walking with a steady, determined pace. The kind of pace that said they'd been walking for a very long time. In this part of the country, a stranger walking out of the dawn usually meant one of 2 things. Trouble, or the man who brings the trouble. A debt collector. A vulture of a different kind. Marcus wiped his hands on his worn pants, the grit scratching his skin, and walked back toward the cabin. He kept his eyes locked on the figure. He wasn't a man who spooked easy, but something about this felt off. As the stranger got closer, the details sharpened. It was a woman. Young. Dark hair in a long braid down her back. Her clothes were worn leather, practical, shaped by hard use. Her face was the kind that knew hardship, but hadn't yet surrendered to it. She couldn't have been more than 20. She walked with a natural grace, a quiet confidence that was jarring out here in the middle of nowhere. Her skin was the color of warm bronze kissed by 1,000 suns. But it was her eyes that held him. Dark, intelligent, and they seemed to see everything. Everything. The sagging porch, the dead cattle, the invisible cloud of despair that hung over him like smoke. "Morning," she called out. Her voice was clear, with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "Morning," he answered, his own voice raspy. He touched the brim of his hat out of habit. "You look like you've been walking a while. Can I offer you some water?" She stopped a few feet from him, and just studied him. It was an unnerving feeling, like she was reading the last 3 miserable years of his life right off his face. Then she nodded. That would be kind. Marcus led her to the cabin, suddenly ashamed of it. The leaning walls, the dusty windows. The whole place just seemed to be sighing, tired of standing up. The inside was worse. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, dirty dishes were piled in the basin, and those bank notices on the table screamed his failure to the world. He poured water from his last clean pitcher into a tin cup. He noticed how little was left. The well wasn't dry yet, but it was getting there. Another clock ticking down. "Thank you," she said, taking the cup with both hands. A formal, almost ceremonial gesture. "I am Elena Proud Horse." The name meant something. He'd heard it whispered in the saloons in Cedar Ridge, the nearest town. The Proud Horse family. Cheyenne. They were respected, known for their wisdom, for a deep understanding of this harsh country that men like him could never grasp. Marcus Thornfield, he said. He looked around the dusty cabin. This is my ranch. Or what's left of it. Elena sipped the water slowly, savoring it. You have been here long? 3 years. Came out from Missouri. Had big plans. Thought I had enough money. He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the dead cattle. The land had other ideas. She nodded, as if she'd heard this story 100 times. The drought has been hard on everyone. You know these parts? I know this land better than most, she said, setting the cup down with a quiet finality. My people have been here longer than memory. So it was true. You're Cheyenne, he stated. My mother was. My father was a trader. He understood that survival means adapting. Her eyes drifted to the bank notices on his table. He saw her take in the numbers, the dates, in a single, sweeping glance. This land is unforgiving to those who fight it. He felt a flush of shame. I suppose you think I'm just another fool from the East, chasing easy money. I think, she said, turning her dark eyes back to him, that you are a man who has worked hard. And I think you are caught between the world you came from and the world you are trying to build. The question is, are you ready to learn a different way? Before he could even ask what she meant, her expression shifted. When did you last eat? The question was so direct it threw him off balance. Yesterday, some beans. And today? His eyes flickered toward the empty cupboards. It was a lie, and they both knew it. He had no horse fit to ride to town, no money for supplies, no hope of finding work. Today, his plan had been the same as yesterday's plan. Sit. Wait. Watch his world crumble a little more. Elena didn't wait for his answer. She walked to his cupboard and opened it. Empty shelves stared back. She went to the next one. The same. Her search was methodical, silent. Then, in the last cabinet, tucked behind some plates he hadn't used in months, she found it. A single loaf of bread. It was 4 days old, hard as a rock. It was his absolute last reserve. The food you save for the moment after you've given up all hope. This is all you have, she said. It wasn't a question. That's all I have, he admitted, the words tasting like dust. Elena looked from the stale bread to his face, then back to the bread. A flicker of some unreadable emotion crossed her features. Then she walked to the stove where a pot of water was still warm from his morning attempt at coffee. May I? He just nodded, having no idea what she intended, but trusting her more than he trusted himself right now. She took the rock-hard loaf, broke it into pieces with surprising strength, and dropped them into the warm water. She began to stir with a wooden spoon, mashing the pieces until they softened into a thick, gritty porridge. My grandmother taught me, she said softly, not looking up from her work, that bread shared always returns tenfold, but bread hoarded turns to dust in your mouth. She divided the porridge into 2 bowls. She handed the larger portion to him. He started to protest, but the look in her eyes silenced him. They ate in silence. The meal was bland, the texture strange, but it filled the hollow ache in his gut. It felt like more than just food. It felt like something else. When they were finished, he had to ask, why? Why what? Why share my last meal with me? You don't know me. I have nothing to give you. Elena stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the eastern hills she'd come from. My people have a saying. The land remembers every kindness and every cruelty. It keeps accounts better than any banker. That sounds like superstition. She turned, and the look in her eyes was sharp, cutting. You have fought this land for 3 years. You have tried to force it to give you what you want. Has that worked? The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. He looked at the peeling paint on his walls, thought of the banknotes, the dead cattle, the empty cupboards. The truth was a bitter pill. No, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It hasn't worked. Then, perhaps it is time to try a different approach. She moved toward the door. A sudden, irrational panic seized him. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't want her to leave. In the space of an hour, her presence had been a single drop of rain in his personal drought. Wait, he called out. Where are you going? Home, she said simply. But I will return. When? She paused in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the blinding morning sun. When the land is ready to show you what it has been trying to teach you. And then she was gone. He watched her walk away, a steady figure moving back toward the horizon, until she was just a speck, and then nothing. He was left alone in his dusty, failing cabin with 1,000 questions, and the strange, unsettling feeling that the world had just tilted on its axis. The rest of the day was a blur. He buried the cattle, the work grim and final. He checked his well, the water level another fraction lower. He kept thinking about Elena, half convinced he'd imagined her, a hunger-induced hallucination. But the stale bread was gone, and 2 clean bowls sat by the wash basin. That night, for the first time in months, Marcus Thornfield slept without the crushing weight of failure on his chest. He dreamed of impossible things. He dreamed of endless green grass, of water flowing where there was only dust. He dreamed of a young woman with dark eyes who knew the secrets of the land. When he woke, he would discover that some dreams are more than just dreams. They're prophecies. Dawn broke with a strange, clean crispness in the air. Marcus woke up feeling rested. It was such a foreign feeling he lay still for a moment, afraid to move and break the spell. The usual sounds of his dying ranch were there. The wind in the dry grass, the creak of the cabin. But there was another sound, a new sound. A sound that was impossible. Water. The distinct musical sound of running water. He shot upright in his bed, his heart hammering. He had to be dreaming. The creek on his property had been a dry, cracked scar for 4 months. But the sound was real, clear and undeniable, flowing. He threw on his clothes, his hands shaking, and burst out of the cabin. The morning light confirmed what his ears had told him. The creek was running. Not a raging torrent, but a steady, healthy stream of clear water, glinting in the new sun like a string of diamonds. He stumbled toward it, fell to his knees and plunged his hands into the flow. It was real. It was cold. He brought the cupped water to his lips. It was the sweetest, cleanest water he had ever tasted. He drank until his throat ached, then splashed his face, the shock of the cold making it all feel real. Where had it come from? It hadn't rained. There was no logical explanation. He thought of Elena's words. The land remembers. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the impossible thought. That's when he heard the hoofbeats. A rider was approaching from the direction of town. As the figure grew closer, Marcus recognized him. Samuel Morrison, one of the most successful ranchers in the whole territory. A man who, Marcus noted with a familiar pang of bitterness, hadn't spoken a word to him in months. "Morning, Thornfield," Morrison called out, reining in his horse. His eyes widened as he saw the running creek. "Well, I'll be damned." "Started this morning," Marcus said, his voice still hoarse with disbelief. "Woke up to the sound of it." Morrison dismounted, his gaze fixed on the impossible stream. "That's a strange thing. I got 3 inches of rain on my spread 2 days ago, but that's miles from here. Shouldn't be enough to get this running again. This creek is fed by the mountain springs." He looked up at Marcus, his expression puzzled. "And those springs have been bone dry since last summer." A chill went down Marcus's spine. If the springs were dry, then where was this water coming from? The impossible thought returned, stronger this time. The bread. The shared meal. Elena. "What brings you out this way, Morrison?" Marcus asked, trying to force the superstitious notions out of his head. "Came to talk business," Morrison said, and his tone was different. The pity Marcus was used to hearing was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like respect. "Been hearing things. Thought you might be interested in a proposition." Marcus tensed. A proposition from a man like Morrison usually meant a handout disguised as a job. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that might solve both our problems." Morrison pointed toward the eastern hills, the same direction Elena had come from. "Got a big contract, supplying beef to the new mining operation up in Silverton. It's more than I can handle alone. I need a partner." Someone who knows this country and isn't afraid of work. Marcus stared at him. You want to partner with me? That's right. 60-40 split. In your favor. You'll be doing the trail work. I put up the cattle. You put up the labor. After the contract's done, you'll have enough to get back on your feet and then some. It was an offer from a dream. It was salvation on a silver platter. It was too good to be true. There had to be a catch. Why me, Morrison? You could hire a dozen experienced hands. Because you're stubborn, Morrison said, looking around at the ranch. You've been fighting this losing battle for 3 years and you're still standing. I need that kind of grit. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Besides, I heard something interesting in town yesterday. What did you hear? Tom Bradley was in town. Said he saw a Cheyenne girl walking toward your property yesterday morning. Morrison's gaze was sharp, probing. Said he saw her leave a few hours later. Said she looked peaceful, like she'd accomplished something. He locked eyes with Marcus. The Cheyenne don't make social calls on struggling white ranchers, Thornfield. Not unless there's a damn good reason. Made me curious. What kind of man earns that kind of attention? The implication was a lightning bolt. It wasn't his grit. It wasn't his experience. It was Elena. Her visit was the reason for the offer, the reason for everything. She was hungry, Marcus said, the words feeling small and inadequate. I shared what I had. Morrison nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. Like I said, that's the kind of character I need for this job. You in? Marcus looked at the flowing creek. He looked at the graves of his dead cattle. He thought of the banknotes on his table. 24 hours ago, he was a ghost. Today, he was being offered a new life. It was all connected. The bread, the woman, the water, the offer. A pattern too perfect to be chance. I'm in, he said. Good. Morrison grinned, mounting his horse. Be ready to ride in 3 days. He tipped his hat. One more thing, Thornfield. That connection to the Proud Horse family. Might be worth holding on to. Could be real useful in this territory. As Morrison rode off, Marcus stood by the creek, his world completely remade. He was no longer a man at the mercy of the land. He was a man the land had chosen. But why? And what would it ask of him in return? As evening fell, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he saw her. A familiar figure on the eastern ridge, silhouetted against the dying light. Elena Proud Horse was returning, just as she'd promised. This time Marcus didn't wait. He walked out to meet her, his steps firm, confident. The weight was gone from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of wonder and a deep, unnerving curiosity. You said the land would teach me a lesson, he called out as she drew near. Was a running creek and a business partnership part of the curriculum? A smile touched her lips, the first real smile he'd seen from her. The land teaches in many ways. Morrison is a practical man. He recognizes an opportunity. Her eyes danced with a light he hadn't seen before. The real question is, do you understand what kind of opportunity you've truly been given? They walked to the cabin together, the sound of the creek a constant, gentle murmur. He felt her confidence, an easy sense of belonging, as if this land was now as much hers as it was his. I understand my life changed in a day, he said. I don't understand why. Perhaps, she said, pausing by the creek and kneeling to touch the water. It's because you finally learned the difference between taking from the land and receiving what it offers. That sounds like philosophy. I'm a rancher. I need practical explanations. She cupped the clear water in her hands. This water flows from a spring high in the mountains, a spring that was dry. The spirits who guard it were displeased with how the newcomers were treating the land. Spirits, he repeated, the word feeling foreign and unbelievable on his tongue. Call them spirits. Call them the natural order. The name doesn't change the truth. She stood, water dripping from her fingers. Yesterday, you performed an act of pure kindness. You gave your last food to a stranger, expecting nothing. That act showed you understand the most important law of this land. Survival, is about community. Those who hoard, die. Those who share, find abundance from sources they can't explain. It was impossible. And yet, it was the only explanation that fit. The water didn't just appear. It was given. So, the water returned because I shared my bread? The water returned, she corrected gently, because you proved you could be trusted with abundance. A man who gives away his last meal can be trusted to use prosperity wisely. The partnership with Morrison, the contract in Silverton. These are not coincidences. They are the land's investment in you. Inside the cabin she moved with an easy familiarity, lighting his lamp, putting a pot on for coffee. It felt as if she belonged here, as if she was a part of this new reality. There is something else, she said, her voice serious as she sat in his only chair. This partnership is just the beginning, but the land will be watching. It will test you. What do you mean? Generosity is easy when you have nothing to lose. The real test comes when you have something worth protecting. Her dark eyes reflected the flickering lamplight. Many men come here with good hearts, but prosperity can make them selfish. It can make them forget the lessons they learned when they were hungry. A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, pricked at him. And if I fail this test? Then the water stops flowing, she said, her tone matter of fact. The partnerships disappear, and you will be right back where you started. Only this time, there won't be a second chance. The weight was back on his shoulders, but it was a different kind of weight now. Not failure, but responsibility. He was being offered a kingdom, but on the condition that he rule it with the heart of a beggar who remembered what it was like to starve. Why me? He asked, the question that had been burning in his mind. There are dozens of ranchers who failed. Why save me? Elena rose and went to the window, looking out at the moonlit land. Because you're the only one who shared his bread. The simple answer hit him with the force of a physical blow. In a world where every man was taught to look out for himself, his one moment of selfless generosity had been a signal fire. It had marked him. My grandmother told stories of the old days, she went on, her voice soft, when the buffalo were like a great moving sea, but they vanished. Because men took more than they needed, and gave nothing back. They forgot that abundance is a gift, not a right. She turned to face him, her expression solemn. The land has chosen to give you another chance, Marcus Thornfield. What you do with it will determine not just your own fate, but the fate of many others. He felt overwhelmed. He had just wanted to survive. Now he was being told he was some kind of example. What if I'm not strong enough? What if the money changes me? Then you will learn what it means to lose everything twice, she said, her voice flat. Then it softened. But I do not think that will happen. A man who worries about becoming selfish rarely does. She moved to the door. The panic rose in him again. Will I see you again? That depends on the choices you make. She paused in the doorway, a silhouette against the sea of stars. If you remember the lesson of the bread, if you keep the promises you have not yet made, then yes, you will see me again. What promises? The promises the land will ask of you when your fortunes have truly changed. When the time comes, you will know. And she was gone, melting into the night. Marcus was left alone with the sound of running water, a sound that was both a promise and a warning. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a custodian of a miracle, and the test had just begun. 3 weeks later, Marcus felt like a character in a book written by someone else. The trip to Silverton with Morrison had been a staggering success. The mining operation was a ravenous beast, hungry for beef, and willing to pay prices that made his head spin. He discovered something about himself out there, in the high mountain passes. The 3 years of failure had been a brutal teacher. He could read the land, feel the weather in his bones, and move cattle with an instinct that even Morrison's veteran hands respected. The contract they signed was his salvation. 18 months of steady, guaranteed income. Enough to clear his debts, rebuild, and expand beyond his wildest dreams. But Elena's warning was a constant whisper in his ear. Prosperity was a different kind of wilderness, with its own dangers. He returned to his ranch to find his world transformed. Neighbors who had ignored his plight now tipped their hats and offered help. The merchants in Cedar Ridge who had cut off his credit now greeted him by name and offered him anything he wanted. The banker who'd been sharpening his foreclosure axe was now talking about expansion loans. The attention felt good. Too good. He had to constantly check himself, to remember the man who had nothing but a stale loaf of bread. The creek flowed, a constant reminder of the fragile pact he'd made. Morrison delivered the first 50 head of prime cattle, and seeing them graze in his meadow, drinking from his miracle stream, filled Marcus with a deep, primal satisfaction. This was the dream. He was standing on his porch one crisp October morning, coffee in hand, watching his new herd, when he heard them. A group of riders coming from town, moving fast. At the head was Sheriff William Cross, a man whose face was permanently set in a serious, no-nonsense expression. "Morning, Thornfield," the sheriff called out, his posse reining in. "Mind if we water our horses?" "Help yourselves," Marcus replied, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. This wasn't a social call. Sheriff Cross walked up to the porch, his eyes scanning the healthy cattle. "Heard about your partnership with Morrison. Good news for you. It's been a welcome change." "I'm sure it has." The sheriff took off his hat, wiping his brow. "Thing is, we've got a situation. Might affect those new circumstances of yours." The familiar dread, a ghost from his recent past, returned. "What kind of situation?" "Rustlers," Cross said, his voice grim. "A professional crew. They're smart, they're fast, and they're bold. They hit the Henderson place last week. Took 40 head. Cleaned him out. You think they'll come after me?" "I think they'll come after anyone with something worth taking," the sheriff said, his gaze pointed. "Word travels fast. Your good fortune hasn't gone unnoticed. 50 head of prime beef is a hell of a temptation." The threat was clear. His prosperity, the gift from the land, had painted a target on his back. Everything he'd just gained could be ripped away in a single night. "What do you suggest?" "Vigilance. Keep the herd close at night. Hire some hands if you can, and report anything suspicious, anything at all." After the posse left, Marcus spent the day moving his herd to a pasture closer to the cabin. The work was a comfort, but it couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of a new storm gathering on the horizon. That evening, as the sun bled across the mountains, he saw a figure on the eastern ridge. It wasn't Elena. This man was taller, broader, and moved with a slow, deliberate gravity. As he drew closer, Marcus recognized him. It was Thomas Proudhorse, Elena's father, a man of immense respect and influence among the tribes. His presence was an honor, but it was also deeply unsettling. A man like Thomas Proudhorse did not visit a white rancher at sunset for a friendly chat. "Mr. Thornfield," Thomas said, his voice deep and formal as he stopped before the porch. "Mr. Proudhorse," Marcus replied, rising from his chair. "This is an unexpected honor. My daughter tells me you are a man who understands the value of sharing. Your daughter taught me a very important lesson." Thomas nodded, his eyes ancient and wise, seeming to weigh Marcus's soul. "She also tells me you have been blessed since learning that lesson. I have been very fortunate." "Fortune is a responsibility," Thomas said, his gaze shifting to the cattle in the meadow. "Those are fine animals, worth a great deal. They're the foundation of my future. And if you lost them?" The question was a punch to the gut. The thought of losing it all again, after tasting success, was unbearable. It was worse than before. Before, he had nothing. Now, he had everything to lose. "I would be ruined," he admitted. "Would you?" Thomas asked, his voice soft but piercing. 3 weeks ago, you had no cattle, no prospects. You survived. What has changed?" Marcus knew the answer. "I have something worth protecting now." "And that changes how you see the world," Thomas stated. 3 days ago, a family of settlers passed through our village. Their wagon was broken. Their children were hungry. We gave them what we could. That was generous of you. It was necessary. But the man, he had heard stories. Stories of a rancher whose creek came back to life. A rancher with a wealthy partner and a fine new herd. Thomas paused, letting the words sink in. He wondered aloud if that prosperous rancher might have been able to help his family more than we could. Shame washed over Marcus, hot and stinging. They never came to my ranch. No, Thomas agreed. They did not. Because they had also heard that successful men often become wary of strangers, especially poor ones. The accusation was a shard of glass in his heart because it was true. He had become more cautious, more suspicious, more protective. The test Elena had warned him about wasn't coming. It was already here, and he was failing. Before Marcus could defend himself, Thomas stood and pointed to the eastern ridge. Look. Marcus followed his gaze, and his blood ran cold. Silhouetted against the star-dusted sky was a herd of cattle. Not 50. Hundreds. A vast, silent river of animals flowing over the ridge. It was impossible. There was no herd that size anywhere in the territory. Where? Where did they come from? He whispered, his voice trembling. That, Thomas said, his voice grave, depends on the choice you are about to make. As if on cue, the sound of a lone horse, ridden hard, came galloping from the direction of town. It was one of Morrison's men, Jake Powell, his face wild with urgency. "Mr. Thornfield!" he yelled, pulling his horse to a skidding stop. "The rustlers! They hit the Jameson place! Took everything! The sheriff's forming a posse! We need every man we can get!" Marcus's world narrowed to a single agonizing point. He looked at his own 50 cattle, grazing peacefully, vulnerable. He looked at the impossible ghostly herd on the ridge. Joining the posse meant leaving his own dream unguarded, risking it all. But not joining meant becoming the man Thomas Proudhorse had just described. Selfish, fearful, unworthy. The mysterious herd on the ridge continued its slow, silent march. He realized with a terrifying clarity that this was it. This was the promise the land was asking him to make. He turned to Jake, his voice clear and steady. "Give me 5 minutes to saddle my horse." A slow smile spread across Thomas Proudhorse's face. "The land remembers every choice, Marcus Thornfield. Choose wisely." As Marcus ran for the barn, leaving his entire future unprotected to help a neighbor he'd never met, the impossible herd on the eastern ridge began to move. It was no longer just crossing the horizon. It was descending, straight toward his ranch. Marcus saddled his horse, his hands trembling. It wasn't fear. It was the sheer, terrifying weight of the moment. Every survival instinct he had honed over 3 years of hell was screaming at him. Stay. Protect what's yours. Let them handle their own problems. But Elena's voice was louder. The real test comes when you have something worth protecting. He swung the heavy saddle onto his horse's back. Thomas Proudhorse stood silently by the corral, watching. "You made the right choice," Thomas said, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "But understand, this is only the beginning." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, tightening the cinch. "Look around you," Thomas said. "What do you see?" Marcus glanced around. His cabin, the moonlight on the flowing creek, his 50 head of cattle grazing in the meadow. Everything looked normal, but Thomas's tone made him look again, deeper. And then he saw it. Or rather, he felt it. His cattle weren't nervous. They were preternaturally calm, grazing as if surrounded by a fortress. The moonlight itself seemed different, brighter. The grass in the meadow looked impossibly green for October, and a faint scent of spring blossoms, a scent that had no business being here, hung in the cool night air. "The land is preparing to show you something," Thomas explained. "A gift. But only if you prove worthy." Jake Powell, the messenger, shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Thornfield, we gotta go. The posse is forming now." "I'm coming," Marcus said, swinging up onto his horse. He took one last look at his ranch, glowing under the strange moonlight. He took one last look at the mysterious, massive herd, now a dark tide flowing steadily down the ridge toward his vulnerable valley. He didn't know if it was a reward or an invasion. The ride to Cedar Ridge was a frantic, moonlit blur. He wasn't thinking about his own cattle anymore. He was thinking about the Jameson family. He knew their despair. He had lived it. He remembered the cold knot of dread in the pit of his stomach, the feeling of watching your life's work vanish overnight. This wasn't about charity. This was about justice. When he reached town, nearly 20 men were already assembled. Ranchers and shopkeepers, grim-faced and armed, united against a common threat. "Glad you could make it, Thornfield," Sheriff Cross said, his voice tight. "We need every man who can ride and shoot." The plan was simple. Follow the trail into the Badlands, find the rustlers' camp, and take back what was stolen. It was dangerous. It could be deadly. But looking at the determined faces around him, Marcus felt no doubt. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. As they rode out under a thick blanket of stars, he thought about the bread. A single act of kindness to a hungry stranger had led him here, to this moment, riding into danger for another stranger's family. It was a strange and winding path. The trail was rough, leading them deep into a desolate landscape of rock and shadow. Jake Powell was a master tracker, reading signs in the dark that Marcus couldn't see. The rustlers had been arrogant, leaving a clear path. They never expected a posse to come after them so fast. Just as the first hint of gray light touched the eastern mountains, they saw it. The faint wisp of smoke from a campfire rising from a hidden canyon up ahead. "All right, listen up," Sheriff Cross whispered, gathering the men. "We want the cattle back, and we want to go home in one piece. Stay together. Watch each other's backs. These men are professionals. They'll fight." As the men checked their rifles, the first rays of dawn spilling over the rocks, Marcus thought of his ranch. He wondered what was happening there, under the watch of Elena's spirits and that impossible descending herd. He pushed the thought away. He had a job to do here. The attack was swift and brutal. The posse charged into the canyon like a force of nature. The rustlers, caught completely by surprise, barely had time to grab their guns. The fight was short, chaotic, and decisive. Marcus was in the thick of it, his years of wrestling stubborn animals turning into an asset as he cut stolen cattle from the rustlers' herd. When the dust settled, the thieves were captured or had fled into the Badlands, and every one of the Jamesons' cattle was recovered. The long ride back was slow, driving the tired animals. Marcus rode alongside Jake, both of them bone-weary but filled with the grim satisfaction of a hard job done well. "Heard something strange back there," Jake said, as they crested a hill overlooking the valley. "What's that?" "One of the boys, Tom Miller, said he saw lights over at your place last night. A lot of them. Said it looked like you had a dozen riders, maybe more." The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline. Riders. At his ranch. While he was gone. Had he been played? Was the whole posse a diversion, a way to lure him away while a different crew stole his own herd? The thought was sickening. "Did anyone check it out?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "Too far out of the way. We had a trail to follow. Tom said the lights vanished just before dawn. Said it was like they finished their business and just disappeared." The choice he had made, the noble sacrifice, suddenly felt like a fool's errand. If he returned to an empty pasture, what good was his generosity then? As they neared Cedar Ridge, he could see his ranch in the distance. From this far away, it looked peaceful, normal. But he knew better. He knew how quickly a dream could turn into a nightmare. "I need to check on my place," he told Jake at the edge of town. "Want some company? Could be trouble." Marcus shook his head. "This is something I have to see for myself." He spurred his horse, breaking away from the posse and the recovered cattle. He rode toward home, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a prayer and a curse tangled on his lips. He was preparing for the worst, for the silence of an empty field, for the brutal punchline to the land's cruel joke. The closer he got, the stranger things seemed. The air itself felt different, thicker, charged with an energy he couldn't name. He could hear the creek, but it sounded louder, fuller. He crested the final rise that overlooked his property. He pulled his horse to a stop. And he stared. His 50 cattle were there, safe, grazing peacefully by the creek. But they were not alone. Covering his valley, from the creek bed to the slopes of the eastern ridge, was a sea of cattle. Hundreds upon hundreds of them. More than he had ever seen in one place. They were the herd from the ridge. They were real. And they were on his land. They were calm, healthy, and branded with a mark he had never seen before. A single elegant feather. Standing near his cabin, as if she had been waiting for him all along, was Elena Proud Horse. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes held a deep, profound satisfaction. He dismounted, his legs weak, and walked toward her, his boots silent on the unnaturally lush grass. He couldn't form a question. He could only stare at the impossible wealth that had been delivered to his doorstep. "The land remembers every choice," Elena said softly as he approached. "You left what you had to help another, so the land has given you what you will need to help many. But whose are they?" he finally managed to ask, gesturing at the endless herd. "Long ago," she explained, "a great sickness took the herds of the tribes. Many were lost. But my great-grandfather led his people and their animals to a hidden valley, a place protected by the spirits. They have lived there, and multiplied, for generations, kept safe, waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For a sign," she said. "For a rancher who understood that the land is not a thing to be owned, but a partner to be respected. For a man who would share his last bread." The riders Tom Miller had seen. It had been Elena's people. They had spent the night driving this ancestral herd, this living legend, down from the mountains and onto his property. It wasn't a gift of magic. It was a gift of trust. A trust he had earned in the dark, riding out to help the Jameson family. He had passed the test. He looked at Elena, at the impossible herd, at the flowing creek, and he finally understood. The banknotes, the drought, the desperation. It had all been a crucible, designed to forge him into the man he needed to be. His prosperity wasn't just about cattle and contracts. It was about community. It was about using his abundance to ensure no one else had to face the kind of despair he had known. The next day, Marcus rode back to the Jameson place. He didn't just bring back their stolen cattle. He brought 30 of his own, from the herd marked with a feather, and left them in their pasture. He told them it was a loan, to be paid back when they could. He knew that day would come. This was the first of many promises he would keep. His ranch became a sanctuary, a place where struggling families could find work, where no traveler was ever turned away hungry. He and Morrison built an empire, but it was an empire built on the principle of the shared bread. Marcus saw Elena often after that. Sometimes she would appear on the ridge at sunset, and they would talk for hours about the rhythms of the land. He learned that the greatest fortune wasn't the size of your herd, but the strength of your community. He had faced his darkest hour and chosen kindness over fear. And in return, the land had given him a new story to write. One of hope, of abundance, and of a promise kept. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. You never know what strange and mysterious tales are waiting to be uncovered.